Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. As always, my name is Jay, and in this video I'm going to talk about a product that I've been using a lot recently, the metallic silver primer from, it's called Metal, from Stynylrez. Now, as you've seen in all my videos that I'm showing you my painting tutorials or anything, I use Stynylrez primer. It is my favorite primer. I cannot recommend it enough to you guys. I use the black and gray primarily. I do use white when I'm painting like yellow, but I don't use white very often for the primers just because of the color schemes that I use. I tend to use darker color schemes since I paint a lot of 40K. But I recently started painting Necrons. Obviously I've been painting Necrons for a while, but I started painting my Necrons again, trying to get them all done. And that's when I started thinking about the Stynylrez Metal Primer that I had purchased a while ago at Adepticon. And I thought, might as well try it. And so I figured today I'll give a review video of Stynylrez Metal Primer. I really do like it, and I'll talk about a few things and just demonstrate it on a model. And yeah, the great thing about this is it allows you to skip a step if you're painting things like Necrons, Granites, any metallic, if the primary color of your model is metallic silver, this will save you a lot of time. You know, it'll definitely save you a lot of time, and because that way you don't need to do a black, primer metal over that, like a middle silver and then a shade, and then that saves you a step. At least you don't have to, do the black primer and then metal. It's just 2 in 1. And so we'll talk about that today. So yeah, let's get to this week's review video of Stynylrez Metal Primer. So hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to be demonstrating the Stynylrez Metallic Primer on this Necron Overlord model. So I figured no better model to paint than a Necron model, or at least maybe that, or a Granite model, with this metallic primer. So I'm going to hit the entire model with a metallic primer, and then I'm just going to demonstrate a quick shade and dry brush on it, just to show how easy it is using this primer, and discuss, of course, the pros and cons with it in detail. So the first thing is, of course, we have the Stynylrez Metallic Primer. Let me just quickly zoom out here. Stynylrez Metal Primer. The key is with this primer is you have to give it a very, very good shake. This is, like the other primers from Stynylrez, it's very thin, right? It's designed for airbrushing, which is what I love about this primer. I airbrush my primer all the time, except for when I'm painting terrain, then I typically use a filler primer from a spray can. But step number 1, definitely give this a really, really good shake, because it does separate. As you can see, the pigments are very heavy, and they do, go towards the more bottom. So I'm just going to give it a very good shake, and then I'm going to get started. Now I will switch to a voiceover because obviously I'm going to turn on my airbrush, my compressor. But as always, I'm going to be using my Badger Patriot 105, and that's the airbrush I highly recommend if you're painting with Stynylrez primer, because it has a much better aperture it's a more general airbrush, and it's much better for spraying primers than a finite detail airbrush. So let's get started, and we will airbrush this guy right now. So I started off, as I mentioned, by giving it a very good shake, and then from the bottle, I just load it directly into my Badger Patriot 105, as you can see here. So I just put a little bit in, and there it is. And it's good to go straight out of the bottle, which is what I really love about this primer. It's the fact that you can airbrush it inside. So airbrush is my normal distance, about half a foot away, maybe a little bit further, but obviously I wanted to control spray, so I kept it relatively close. But as you can see here, my airbrush is barely in frame. And I just did a nice even coat over the entire model. And as you can see, it sprays very nicely and has such a great shine directly from the bottle. It is a bit light. I do find that it's a mid-tone primer, but you'll just have to deal with that. But as you can see, it goes on really nicely, and it was really easy to apply directly onto this plastic model. Alright, so it's all done being sprayed, and so it's actually pretty easy to clean out of the airbrush. I do find it's actually pretty easy. I do rinse it out a couple times with water from my airbrush, and then with just some Badger cleaner just to rinse out fully. The key is with this primer, because it is metallic pigments, you got to make sure it's cleaned out at the bottom. Otherwise, these metallic pigments will mix in with whatever next you're spraying, and it gets pretty shiny fast, as you know. So it actually does clean pretty quickly, and I haven't found that much tip dry either. So it's actually pretty nice. It's really nice to spray, as you can see, and it cleans out nicely as well. I just said, I always recommend a couple rounds of water through the airbrush, and then some airbrush cleaner, just to make sure that it all gets cleaned out. So I'm just kind of waiting right now for it to dry. Now this primer does take a little bit longer to dry, I do find, than the black or the gray primer that I typically use. But that's okay, just obviously let it dry entirely. You can see though it has such a great shine as it's drying, and I'll get back to it when it's completely dry. But this is basically the color it will finish at. So it is a lighter silver. If you do paint very dark silvers, you would then want to hit it with a very heavy shade to bring it down, and I'm going to do so in a moment, just to show you guys and girls how easy it is to use this product, of course. And I'm going to use once it's done drying, I'm going to use a non-oil shade directly from my airbrush. Just put it into my Patriot 105 and spray this down, and you'll see it does pick up the shades quite nicely. The next thing you will find though with this primer is that it does have a very smooth, shiny surface, and so it can be slightly difficult to paint over, I do find, if you're going straight over this primer. But luckily with the silver, you would most likely, if your main color was silver, you do what I'm doing next and then hit it with a shade. From the shade you do a dry brush or an edge highlight, and then from there you could paint over the silver. I do find it does take a couple coats if you're doing thin coats like I typically do to paint over the silver, just to make sure that it's nice and all done. But a real cool benefit of this shininess, I do find, is if you wanted to apply instead of a shading to the cape, you wanted to apply a glaze. It actually works very nicely, I find, over this primer because it is so shiny, and then you put the glaze over and it actually looks nice. So that's kind of cool. But as I said, it does take 2 or 3 thin coats to paint over this primer if you're going directly over it. So what I usually do is then hit it with a shade, I find, and by the shade and dry brush over that, it does fix some of the surface tension. Has a good surface tension to it. So I'm just going to let this dry, and then when it's done drying, I'm going to then hit it with a non-oil shading, once again, directly from my Badger Patriot 105 airbrush. Alright, so next then I put some non-oil in my Badger Patriot 105, and I quickly just airbrushed the model with non-oil. As you can see, it actually, as I said, it picks up shades very nicely, and it significantly darkens this primer. I think it works very well, and because it is lighter, it does work very well with shades, and you can use, a variety of tones, blues, browns, blacks, even reds, to really tint the model the way you want it, and then I'm just going to let it dry. So, as you can see, after the shade has just had a few minutes to dry, looks good. And it's significantly darker. So what I intentionally did was I did not spray the robe, so you can see the original color here. Significantly lighter. But as you can see, once one shade has been applied, and this is just non-oil, it significantly darkens it to a tone that's, I think, much more applicable to more models. And just if you want to hit like gray nights, you can do it with a blue shade or a bluish black shade. You can do a combination of blacks and browns, and it brings it to more medium tone that you'd want to build on top of versus the initial one, which is very light. So that's it. So I'm just going to take a quick dry brush and hit it with a quick iron breaker and then a little bit of Runefang steel, and show you the result of the final product. And as you can see, so far I've spent like less than a minute on this model so far. It's been about a minute and a half maybe, just priming it, dry brush, and then, and then shading, and then I'll hit with the dry brush. So this is going to be an awesome time saver, as you can see, for if you're horde painting Necrons or Grey Knights. This will definitely help you out a lot. But let's get started with a quick dry brush. Alright, so the next steps are pretty easy. I just did very light dry brushes first of Iron Breaker. As you can see, I just frequently loaded my brush, wiped off the pigments, and did a quick dry brush just to bring up the tones again. But as you can see, after a quick couple just dry brushes, it really does bring the metallics to life. And by using this primer, I was able to essentially skip a step, and that's kind of nice. But as you see now, it's building up the tones again to a more worn out silver, and then I'll do a very, very light dry brush just with Runefang steel. And the goal of this step is just to simply, bring out the very edges, make them really pop on the model. Yep, so I'm just going to load my brush and do a quick dry brush as well on this part. And as you can see, it really does make these areas really do stand out. And so there you have it. After, so I primed it with Stynylrez metal primer, hit it with a non-oil shading, and then a light dry brush, iron breaker, and Runefang steel. And as you can see, he's good to go. The metal is good. It saved me a lot of time. Just having to do one coat. As I said, it definitely works if you're painting Necrons or granites or something that's primarily metallic. And look at that. And as I said, this does, by doing this process, it does really change the surface tension, I find, so that you can paint over it quite nicely. Yeah, just as a reference point as well. I did the same thing earlier with another Overlord, Necron Overlord. And as you can see, I'll show you here, it painted over quite nicely. And you can see I did the same thing on him, and I was able to paint over the other areas very well. And that's it. So, as you can see, it's a good primer, and I recommend it if you're painting large amounts of metallic models. So, that concludes my review of Stynylrez Metal Primer. So what I like about it, first of all, it has really good coverage. You do need to give it a very good shake. As I said, it separates very quickly. So I do find I have to shake it between usage, even in the same day if I'm priming a lot of models. If you're painting models like Necrons, Granites, something largely metallic, this is the primer for you. If you have an airbrush, I definitely recommend a general use airbrush like a Badger Patriot 105 versus a fine detail airbrush like a Sotar 2020. Because since this primer, it is a little bit thicker than the normal paints. It does have a little bit slippery of a surface, so if you want to paint directly over it, I recommend doing something like a shade over top and then painting over that. It does help a bit. Cons, as I said, the only thing is using a metallic primer is number one. It does gunk up your airbrush, so you do have to clean it. I recommend thoroughly rinsing, spraying it a couple times with water and then some airbrush cleaner, as well as cleaning off your tip as well, because you don't want the remnants of the metallic pigments on your needle or in your airbrush cup. Because if the next paint you add, it'll just make it metallic, you know. Other con is that, as I said, the surface tension, it just becomes a little bit slippery to paint over if you're doing it directly over, but that's okay. You can just do 2 or 3 thin coats, but it will save you a lot of time. As I said, it turned out really nicely on this Overlord that I was working on, and it was pretty simple. Just simply priming silver, non-oil shade, a couple quick dry brushes. I've spent like 2 minutes on the model, and it's already looking awesome. And I highly recommend it. Stynylrez is by far my favorite primer. I'm not biased at all, but it's an amazing primer. I can't recommend it enough. It's awesome. And there you go. As I said, it's a great primer, and I hope you enjoy it. And go check it out. It's available for sale anywhere Badger products are usually for sale, especially wherever Stynylrez primers are for sale. So go check that out. Stay tuned for more videos. I really hope you enjoyed this review/tutorial on how to use Stynylrez metallic primer. And stay tuned for another review. My next review, I'm going to talk about more metallics. I'm going to talk about color shifting chameleon paints by Green Stuff World. I can't wait to show you guys that stuff as well. So stay tuned for more videos. Huge thank you to all my Patreon subscribers for supporting my videos. It's because of them that I can do these kind of reviews and product reviews. Stay tuned for more videos. Like something to Jay saying, happy painting with your airbrush.